who are taking part in the humor are really smart, or at least one of them is, right? Maybe even smarter than Hamlet. So anyway, what are they chatting about? Speak up.
They talk about Ophelia's death and how if she should deserve to get full Christian rights on her burial.
Right, and they even talk about like if she wasn't a gentlewoman, like if she wasn't an aristocrat type person, that maybe she wouldn't be getting as much as she is, right? So she, Shakespeare often puts a little class talk in there too, right? And then of course we see the guy who is supposed to be, in a lowly position, sound extremely clever, and the interplay with Hamlet's really great. If we can't like sit there and dissect every joke, but they go through some puns with the word lie back and forth for like 5, 6, 7 lines, and it's really clever and funny. And Hamlet, even jokes to Horatio that sometimes it's the times have grown so strange, and just to paraphrase that, sometimes someone as lowly as him, can keep up with someone like us. That's not supposed to happen. Kind of marvels over that. So obviously the reason that she's denied the complete rights of the church is what? Number 2. Somebody started to talk there.
That she killed herself.
Okay.
Right.
Who was that?
That was Sophia.
Thanks, Sophia. I don't have my big monitor, so it's hard to spot everybody. Yeah, at least her death was doubtful. The guy says, right? We overhear the conversation. Not only do we hear from the gravediggers, but we hear the conversation between the priest and Laertes, who was really upset. And of course, huge dramatic irony going on here, right? Because they don't know. Bobby, do you have a question there, or is he just frozen like that? I thought you were raising your hand, Bob. Oh, breakfast. Got it. Pause. Oh, there's Ariana. Yeah, this is too choppy. I gotta move. It's gonna get on my nerves. Excuse me. Set, guys. Okay, much better. All right. So who's this Yorick guy? What's the kind of significance that is attached to him as Hamlet speaks, and they're kind of digging up skulls out of the earth, right?
Yorick was Hamlet's old jester, his father's old jester in the castle. And he holds his skull and remembers all the memories. And he's like, wow, all that life is just now a dead skull in the ground. Then compares it to Alexander and how he was such a great figure. And now he can just be a hole in somebody's wall.
Yep, very well put. He even talks about, this could be a lawyer, this could be that, this could be Alexander. By saying Alexander, he means Alexander the Great. And then he comes across somebody that he realizes he knows. It sounds like he was kind of a goofy uncle to him, right? Like he did all this goofy stuff, and he just can't believe it's him. And it's just kind of making him contemplate, immortality. This is how we're all going to end up, Horatio. What are you guys talking about over here? Property brothers? Nice. Okay, yeah, you want to tour the whole house? Show them in the backyard? All right. Hamlet Laertes, how do they behave in their meeting at Ophelia's funeral? Well, that goes well, huh? So Hamlet's in a little bit of shock, right, when he realizes what's going on. Laertes is an emotional shock in general, right? What does Laertes do, and then what does Hamlet do, and how do they what's the content of their arguing?
Laertes jumps in the grave, and then Hamlet jumps in the grave, and then they fight each other in the grave. And it's just like this weird thing of like who's gonna be sadder.
Right. Right. What do you do? Drink poison, eat a crocodile? Ridiculous things, right? And they're over Ophelia's body. I mean, Laertes is getting in there and like hugging his dead sister, and then Hamlet can't stand, and it's also super weird because it's like they're competing lovers or something. At least I hope not. Laertes is her brother, right? Although, I know you're making like weird faces right now, but I've always found the affection between Laertes and Ophelia to be a little bit weird. And there's always this like slight weird undercurrent of, I don't know, familial relations. There's people that talk about like all kinds of like weird stuff between Hamlet and his mother from like an Oedipal complex point of view. And I think that Laertes, I don't know, maybe it's just me. But anyway, it's a ridiculous argument, right? And I think they both kind of, especially Hamlet realizes it later that Laertes was grieving, and it was understandable how he's behaving, and maybe he shouldn't have done that. Anyway, yeah, worst funeral ever. In the meantime, so then Hamlet and Horatio end up talking about what's been going on when they move on from that, and how did Hamlet, quote unquote, take care of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern? Did you kind of follow the narrative there? They're on their way, right? They get hit by the pirates, and then actually before they get hit by the pirates, what does Hamlet do?
Well, he finds the letter that calls for his execution, and then just creates a new one saying that the messengers are to be killed. I think.
That's right, yeah. And he had the king's seal with him and everything.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alex.
And then all the pirate stuff happens and he escapes.
Right. Which means that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are then on their way to England without Hamlet, thinking, that they're going to deliver some important message, and the message is to kill the people who just gave you this letter. I find that hilarious. Is it too much? Like, did they deserve that?
Not really, to be honest.
It seems like a little bit of overkill, right? And then when there's that line when he finishes explaining to him, and Horatio says, a lot of people argue about this line. I think I talked about it in my audio commentary. I don't know how many people are using that, but he says, well, what a king is this? And some people think that's like, wow, that's really messed up. And then some people, I tend to think, what a king is this means, man, wow, you really cleverly figured your way out of that situation and took care of business. You can take whatever way you want. I think it's kind of ambiguous, but anyway, that's what happens. And that's Horatio's. Anybody have any thoughts on that as far as how you interpreted what he said, or anything else about that? No? Okay, moving on. Sixth then, how does Hamlet feel about Laertes now as expressed in his conversation with Horatio?
Hamlet sort of sympathizes with him. He's like, he's just mourning for his sister. It was kind of stupid of me to in the grave with him.
Pretty much, yeah. Everybody's mourning over someone at this point, right? And Laertes again set up as antagonist somewhat to Hamlet, but really more because Claudius manipulated him, right? Claudius has magnified and pointed his anger toward Hamlet. Now, I mean, of course, Hamlet was responsible for Polonius's death, somewhat irresponsibly, but again, everything, if you really think about it, everybody's behavior in all of these incidents, they all trace back to one thing, right? If Claudius hadn't have murdered his brother, then none of this would have happened, right? I mean, Hamlet and Ophelia would probably still be dating, and Hamlet and his parents would be okay. Hamlet would be in line for the throne like he should be, and then they would probably be set to defend themselves against Denmark more efficiently. That's I think that's what kind of leads back toward the theme when we get to it. All right, so what goes down with Claudius's plan? So we had that was all set up in Act 4, right? What actually happens? You can kind of paraphrase this for us.
Okay. So we got Gertrude drinking the poison wine. Done. Then
Shocker.
we got Laertes scratching Hamlet. So we know he's done. Then they switched the swords. When did that happen? They switched them.
They're like rolling around on the floor, wrestling, and the swords get switched. Yeah.
Hamlet scratches Laertes, so he's done.
They're both toast.
Then the whole plot comes undone because Laertes is like, I can't do it anymore. I did it. And then Hamlet not only stabs Claudius, but then makes him drink the poison wine because he was like, you definitely need to die.
Yeah.
And everyone
like two ways at the same time, poison and stabbing. So he certainly gets his revenge. That doesn't mean like happy ending, everything's great. I mean, Hamlet's on his way out, right? But that's what happens. Okay. And Gertrude just kind of ends up being, collateral damage in the middle of that because of Claudius's scheming, right? And he even says, Gertrude, do not drink, but he's not going to say, I put poison in it, don't drink. He doesn't have the guts to come out right then, and so he loses his wife then. Shortly following that, Horatio says, I'm more antique Roman than a Dane. What's he saying that he wants to do that Hamlet quickly stops him from doing, which is a historical and actually a literary allusion to Shakespeare's, really his own play.
So Horatio is trying to kill himself, because I looked into this one because I was confused. Cool. Apparently Brutus, after he was like stabbing Caesar and like one of his other friends, I think Cassius or something, they killed themselves because they felt bad or something.
It was later in the play when the armies were in the enemy army. I can't remember all the characters right now, but when all the enemy armies were kind of closing in, and rather than surrender, that's what they did. And actually, that's what Roman generals that wasn't made up. That wasn't just like for drama. That's actually what Roman generals would do. Is a tradition that they would either drink poison or what's called run on their sword. They would like position their sword like an angle on the ground, and they would like literally like run onto it with their chest. Crazy. So he's saying he wants to go down with the ship, right? He's and for all of the treachery, right, and the dishonesty that's been going on all through the play with so many people, Horatio has always been this absolute, true friend, and the way Hamlet talks about him, probably even in more instances that are in the action of the play, right? He always trusts him, and he always was trustworthy, and right down to the very bitter end. But like I said in the commentary, somebody's got to be left to tell the story, right? And so Horatio is the one who ends up explaining everything to Fortinbras. So coincidentally, Fortinbras is coming in from his conquest of Poland with whatever, with his intentions are kind of unclear. Was he kind of going to take over? It's hard to tell. But he comes right in at the right moment, and Hamlet has actually told Horatio what about him? That's number 9.
That he's going to be king.
Yeah, that he's going to be, that he has his blessing to be king, right? Maybe we need someone who's extremely, decisive to come and set things right. It makes sense if you think about it. Okay, let's keep moving here. I know we're going to have a lot of readers' logs. We talked about number 10 already. Obviously, that's comic relief, right? That's the effect that it has on the tone of the play. 11, Hamlet's remarks to Horatio, our indiscretion sometimes serves us well when our deeper plots depall. There's a divinity that shapes our ends, that whole thing. How do these remarks reflect significant changes in attitudes towards problems and toward life itself? Any thoughts on that one? How does it kind of sound there? What does he accept about life there and plans that you make? Nobody on that one? Okay. The idea is that we can all have these super detailed plans and be obsessed about trying to make everything go exactly the way that we want it to go, but things are going to get messed up, right? And things are not going to go exactly the way that we want them to. And sometimes we just have to accept not only some bumps along the way, but maybe some big sacrifices to, to reach our goals and to get where we want to be. Okay, that's the idea there. Okay, up to 12, compare Hamlet's ideas about life and death at the beginning of Act 5 as expressed in his remarks to York, and later in his remarks to Horatio the moment before the duel with Laertes. The thoughts there. Number 12.
Okay, and number 12, Hamlet. Okay, Hamlet's always questioning the reasoning of life and how everything just ends. You enter your life, you make memories, your relationships, you do all these things, but then at the end it just ends. And then him looking at the skull, and Yura realizes, wow, all the things, all the times he carried me, all the things he did for me, all the times he made everyone laugh, is just gone. And then when he talks to Horatio, or guys, he says, the rest is silence. Maybe that represents, like previously when he said about the dream, about how you don't know what the other side is, and we're all resting. There's just silence, forever empty.
Yeah, and you like that last line there. People have kind of thought about like that many times over the decades, centuries. The rest is silence, right? And he just kind of accepts the piece of dying at the end there. What do we make of the Queen's final words? So a lot of people didn't answer that. Kind of trouble with that question. What do we end up thinking about Gertrude by the end? Maybe not just by those last lines, but those last lines plus everything else that she said late in the play. Where do we end up feeling like she stands as far as what she knew and what she might have done or not? Kind of what I'm trying to get at there.
I didn't think that she knew anything about all of it, and I thought that her final words, saying that she was sure it was poison, so Hamlet wouldn't drink it, was kind of just showing that the whole time she was really just trying to be a good mom to him, even though she wasn't always so successful. But she really stood with him more than anyone else. So I don't think that she knew about all of the stuff happening.
Totally agree. She's trying to be a good mom, and she got swept into Claudius's web of treachery and dishonesty. You could tell she was surprised by the poison, but she knew it was poison, which shows she certainly didn't know what was going on with the sword, with the whole sword plot, right? And she wouldn't have drunk it in the first place, right? But it kind of looks like, again, that she didn't know anything, right? And he leaves it up to us to decide, but I think that's certainly seems to be what's implied there. Okay, up to 14. Why? How come we have soliloquy in every single act except this last one? And he kind of slowly moved from depression to anger to self-pitying and frustration, and then to determination, and then how come to soliloquy in Act 5? Does that make sense on some level?
I think it kind of does, because in Act 5, I like how it ended with the rest is silence, and I think that does more than what a soliloquy could, because everything's chaotic and everyone pretty much dies, and it's just what is there left to say? I think Shakespeare really wanted it the reader or the audience to think for themselves, okay, what do you think about all this? What do you think is gonna pretty much figure out what happens next, instead of everyone saying what happens next or thinking what's gonna happen. like make the reader like or the audience think about like what do you think about what's happening and all this chaos, like what's gonna happen.
Sure. Yeah, and it leaves it open. Before I drone on about anything else, anybody else have any thoughts about that? There's could be a lot we could think about there as far as reasons why that's not there. What are soliloquies about? And then what is Act 5 about? What are soliloquies about in general? In the general sense. Characters doing what?
They're thinking.
Right, exactly. They're thinking, they're contemplating, they're ruminating, they're obsessing, they're philosophizing, right? But Hamlet needed to get past all of those things, right? And actually do something. And so Act 5 is about acting, right? Not in a drama sense, but in acting as in real actions. And that's what happens. Okay, do you find it ironic or appropriate about Fortinbras coming and taking over? And then any thoughts about those quotes or anything? Does it make sense to you?
I mean, as I said at the beginning, it's more fun to me than anything. Just because he just walks in there expecting at least something to happen. But no, he's just handed the country because everybody else is dead.
Literally, there's nobody left that could even be considered for the throne. It is kind of darkly funny. I agree. Can anybody else have any thoughts about how it kind of makes sense thematically? Is what I'm really trying to get at.
I think it's fitting because like with most Shakespearean like tragedies, the foil always ends up getting like the come up. Like in Macbeth, Macduff end up killing him, and kind of like end thing that's very like I guess the solution just like Shakespeare doesn't want to leave you hanging, so like something has to happen with the foil. I don't think I read any other tragedies to show that, but I think in most of them the foil always comes back victorious at the end.
That's a good point, because there's a difference between a foil and an antagonist, right? Because the true antagonist is of course Claudius, right? But Fortinbras seems to kind of be an antagonist to the whole of Denmark from the very beginning, right? But what he really serves as is, even though he doesn't appear a lot, you can understand by what he does, there's a foil to Hamlet, who is maybe ruminating and obsessing and procrastinating too much while Fortinbras is out there, like, heading straight, to action. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Hamlet's less of a person, but maybe, what I always see in this is that when there's treachery and corruption in a society that happens, that's that deep and that severe and that wrong, it can cripple and ruin everything so much that it necessarily tragically takes someone of such decisiveness, to set things right. And that's certainly what Fortinbras is, even though, that's not what we wish happens at the end from the beginning. We don't want Hamlet to die, right? But, it kind of becomes a lesson of, all right, the dangerousness, the danger, severe danger, and the consequences of treachery and dishonesty in a society by the leader, right? Okay, let's get those readers logs going. You guys look at the chat and just kind of step up, and I'm going to try not to, I always like to say, hey, that was cool what you said, and I'm going to try not to talk too much so we can keep things moving here. So whoever's first, go ahead.
I'm first.
Okay, and if you guys can maybe read 2 or 3 lines, and I won't waste time trying to search up each thing, I'll just stay on the grid.
Okay. I did in scene 1 when Hamlet and Laertes were fighting, when Hamlet said, "I loved Ophelia. 40,000 brothers could not, with all their quantity of love, make up my sum. What wilt thou do for her?" That was my part. And then I did details associated with the character and are used to describe the character, contribute to a reader's interpretation of that character. And then I said that this was when Hamlet was fighting Laertes and talking about how much he loved Ophelia. Through the play, we've seen Hamlet in a lot of different aspects and like through different decisions that he's made. And I think that this showed him in like a more vulnerable, like loving, like not loving, but like showing his love for her, like state, how he was talking about how like no amount can define how much he loved her. And I think that this is Shakespeare showing us Hamlet in a different way, because we've been seeing him like as like kind of like crazy with like killing people. And this is showing us that he's like still has these feelings and that he really did love Ophelia. And then this helps us interpret Hamlet in a way that we weren't really doing before, like based off of prior events.
Excellent point. Even though you can tell he lets out stuff to Ophelia earlier when they have their conversations that he does probably love her. He's struggling with trying to keep his performance up before and being ironic and sometimes mean and stuff. And here it's like he's held it in so long in the situation with Laertes' forces. He just like taps something and you hear his real emotion come out for sure. Good one, good point. All right, next one.
It's Carly, and
Yep.
I did scene 2. There's divinity that shapes our end. Rough hue, how we will. The skill was explain the function of a character changing or remaining unchanged. Hamlet is describing to Horatio how he woke up to the ship heading to England due to his insomnia, and he found letters saying that he was supposed to be beheaded. So he wrote the letters to that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern should be killed. This shows that Hamlet has changed because he used to be so indecisive about his choices, like the time whether he should kill Claudius when he was all by himself. And
I'm sorry, I thought you were done. Keep going.
and when he killed Polonius, he's been acting more recklessly, and he doesn't care what happens to him.
Yeah, maybe even yeah, that was kind of reckless, but here he's more kind of thinking and acting, and he's going to get out of this, and he's very determined. So yes, good point. All right, next.
It's Adam. I did in scene 2, and he says the readiness is all. He's talking to Horatio about the duel with Laertes, which is going to happen soon. And by that, he basically means he doesn't really care if he dies. Like, he's ready for it, which kind of goes back to when he says to be or not to be.
Yeah, good. That's definitely what he means there, right? And that's something that he had not come, even as desperate as he's never really quite been comfortable with the idea of, well, maybe I'll have to die. And that's unfortunately, he comes to be at peace with that, right? But a lot of people say that it kind of becomes kind of an idiom, like when people are going into a situation where they're like, well, I just have to be fearless here. If something horrible happens, it does. You say the readiness is all. Remember that one. Okay, next one.
It's Alex, and I did this, the part where it says, "Hear thou, incestuous, murderous, damned Dane," when he's killing Claudius. And the skill I used was like the significance of an event. I think this scene is like really important because Claudius is finally getting what he deserves, and Hamlet is finally finishing the mission that the ghost of his father like set him out to do. And I think it's like before Hamlet could die, he needed his revenge on Claudius, who has now killed his father and mother. And the play was like very dark, obviously, and tragic, but I think this was like one happy thing I took away at the very end, that that Hamlet could finally like die with peace, knowing that he killed Claudius.
Yeah, it was almost like, although he accepted that he might have to die, maybe accepting that he might have to die was what let him do what he needed to do to kill Claudius, right? He wouldn't let him get himself wrapped up into that whole scheme there if he was still afraid to die. And it did kind of feel good, didn't it? Yep. Okay, next.
All right, it's Molly. I'm going next. All right, so I did Fortinbras, and when he was talking about, for me with sorrow I embrace my fortune, which now to claim my vantage doth and fight me. And then I talked about how Fortinbras and Hamlet, why are you leaving, is kind of at odds with each other, not literally in the story, but like figuratively, because Hamlet is struggling with the idea of death, and he comes to terms eventually, but he's constantly at odds with people. So he's making himself seem crazy, trying to kill a king. But Fortinbras is at peace with killing for revenge. But he's met with his task already finished. And he won king by default. And so I was talking about dramatic irony, like illustrating a point about death and not to think about it too much. And Hamlet's downfall was his overthinking. And Fortinbras was very action-oriented, but he didn't get to employ it.
Good job. It says so much about Fortinbras. So I don't know whether you read his lines at the end. He's so respectful and like noble in what he says. And that's kind of a weird thing for us to think about, like to admire someone because he sounds like a king, but he sounds like someone who has a lot of honor, and he doesn't come in and like laugh at the situation or anything. He even has some nice words about Hamlet, that he's heard. Basically, he was a really great guy and would have made a great king. He doesn't come in and gloat, at all. He expresses sorrow over the situation. That kind of further shows how he's definitely fit for the position. Okay. Annalise, stop distracting me. Next one. I didn't know that. Okay.
I did the part where the gravedigger and Hamlet are just kind of going back and forth about the grave. And the skill is the significance of an event depending on its relationship to the narrative, the conflict, and the development of characters. So at first you kind of see the gravedigger as like comic relief, and it's a little useless just like to have this classic banter. But as you get into it and like the skull comes up, you see the actual scene is like significant, and how it's like progressing Hamlet, because he's seeing like death doesn't really matter, and I'm just kind of let it come, and it's just gonna happen eventually to everybody.
Yeah. He even says let it be a little bit later. A lot of people often equate that to the Len song, right? Just let it be. But yeah, that's definitely, and that's why it's such an iconic image of Hamlet holding the skull, right? Like you've probably seen that on a million things before, and it's on the cover of just about any edition of the book that you look at, because it's the moment when Hamlet's character develops and sees that he's not going to be here forever. He needs to do what he's going to do with the time he's got left, no matter how long or short it's going to be. All right, next.
It's Maya.
Okay.
So I did the part where Hamlet was talking with Horatio about life. And so I said, this part, Hamlet is explaining the circle of life. He tells Horatio that no matter who you are, you will end up dying. His speech here contrasts with the crazy mentality that he put on previously. So he isn't really speaking madly. He's having more of a deeper conversation with Horatio, which is like the only person he trusts right now. And previously were led to like think that he was somewhat crazy, and he was also acting crazy for show. But by getting his opinion on like the circle of life, you can like understand him more. And I said that also leads us to infer and later conclude what might happen regarding like Claudius's death.
Sure, definitely. All right, good job. I'm gonna keep it moving here. Next one.
It's Christopher. I did where Hamlet is blessing for Fortinbras to be the next king. And the skill I did was readers can infer a character's motives from that character's actions. Said that we can infer the reasoning behind Hamlet giving his blessing to Fortinbras based on his his chance encounter with the army before, and how he was kind of inspired by their devotion to like send a bunch of troops over some useless land. He was kind of inspired by that, and I think that's why he knows that Fortinbras would be a good king.
Good. Yeah, reaching back to Act 4, that was definitely a moment that that connects there. You can see he was an honorable, determined and honorable guy. Next.
It's Micaiah. I did the part where Hamlet remarks, was it Hamlet wronged Laertes, never Hamlet, who does it then, his madness. And I did details that reveal something about a character. And basically I said, before the deadly fencing match commences, Hamlet tries to ask for forgiveness from Laertes. During his apology, Hamlet places the culpability on his supposed madness rather than himself. At this point, we can conjecture that Hamlet officially has reached the peak of his insanity, and that his last ploy, even though partially sincere, revolved around vaulting this alternate side of him. Perhaps we can interpret this as an internal conflict within Hamlet, as his own reality had been slowly warped by such madness.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird moment, and Laertes thinks he's being sarcastic at some point, but even though he acts a little weird, for the most part he is sincere, and he does want to try to ask his forgiveness. All right, good point. Moving on.
All right, this is Andrew. I'm doing the second it's like when they're dying and like saying his last words, and then Hamlet responds, and I'm doing the skill where it's saying identify and describe what actual details reveal about a character in their motives. So this kind of reminded me of like the typical movie book kind of thing where a character as they're dying are saying like their dying words are like everything they truly mean, because it's like, you know, the last thing they're going to say before they die. So you truly get to see that Laertes is forgiving Hamlet, which is kind of a lot of like, it's difficult for him to say because Hamlet stabbed his father and then basically was the cause of his sister's death. And then one of his last words right after that was telling Horatio that he wants everybody to know the truth so that they don't think he's like actually crazy and that his reputation isn't tarnished after he dies.
Yep. Very accurate. Good job. Thank you. Hold on just a second here. I got to do something. Okay, next.
This is Spencer, and I did where aired these last words where it says he's justly served. And then for the skill, I did a character's perspective may shift over the course of the narrative. And I said his last words before dying show how much his perspective of Hamlet changed in one scene. Because after Hamlet apologized to him, he kind of looked at him a little different, and then he saw how he got put by the king and just apologized to Hamlet, forgave him for his father's death.
Good. Definitely partly Hamlet's apology that causes that. And you have to look at Laertes as a pretty honorable guy by the end, because he manages to see through his own anger toward the guy who did indeed kill his father, right? And certainly had something to do with his sister losing her mind and dying too. And so for him to be able to kind of see through that and think to himself, maybe all this is because of what Claudius did. And here I let myself get wrapped up in that. And, you know, he dies with some honor at the end. Cheers. Next.
Hey, it's Anna. I did the part after they were talking about Yorick, where Hamlet was realizing like that when Alexander dies, he's just like clay, and he talks about Caesar and everything. And so I talked about character perspective in this part, about how earlier when he had been insulting Claudius and he told Claudius he was gonna like die and go through worms and fish and like a beggar and everything. He was using it as like an insult, and I felt like this part after he realized like, oh look, someone I know is dead and everything, he was realizing that it actually does happen to everyone, and that everyone's just going to be like returned back to the earth, and like their bodies are going to be used for something else after they die. I felt like it was him realizing that this was the truth of the world and there's no getting around it, rather than it just being an insult.
For sure. Yeah, that's part of that whole realization he has all through a couple scenes there. Next.
It's Isaiah.
Yep.
I did the part where the grave diggers are talking in the beginning
Mm-hmm.
and how Bill's setting. I said that the grave diggers, they start to discuss the burial of Ophelia, and then the one grave digger talks about how, or he explains that her situation and how she died and how it really is a suicide, but based on her status and the time period, that it can be, or I said it shows that there are old ways of thinking to explain obvious situations, especially when it's royalty at fault, that they can do no wrong even when it's blatantly obvious, like how before Claudia said that even if Hamlet did whatever, that the public will still love him.
Yeah, it's like no matter what you do, you're not going to be blamed. Definitely Shakespeare putting a little social commentary in there, like he does a few times. Okay, who's next?
It's Katrina, and I did the scene where Laertes and Hamlet begin to fight, and I said that Hamlet, who's already distraught about the death of his beloved, fights Laurette's back, and this conflict between Hamlet and Laurette adds to the main conflict between Hamlet and Claudius, because Hamlet is unsuspecting of Claudius and Lorette's plan of killing him, and Lorette's wanting revenge for his father, and Ophelia gives Claudius the advantage against Hamlet in their conflict.
Nice. Makes sense. I think we're on the home stretch here, guys. Probably have, what, a couple left? I know Tone just went in on chat. Was there anybody else before him first?
I think so.
That was Katrina who just went, right? Yeah, so I guess it's you next time. Tone, go ahead.
I chose This Is I, Hamlet the Dane, and I said readers can infer a character motives that from that character's action or inactions. And I said in this scene, Hamlet enraged Laertes by disrupting Laertes' alone time with Ophelia and talking to him with a poor attitude by saying, "Whose grief is so loud and clear?" Although everyone was silent, Hamlet arose beyond the silence to prove that his feelings for Ophelia are incomparable and stronger than Laertes'. This is due to Laertes trying to disrupt the burial process by jumping into the grave and being close to her. Hamlet then had to trigger Laertes' emotions so that he can fight for Ophelia's peaceful rest without anyone interfering with that. I think he's sending the message that although he couldn't do anything for Ophelia's death, at least he could prevent anyone from interfering with Ophelia's peaceful burial process.
Yeah, I actually really love that line when he steps out, like nobody knows he's there, and he comes out and says a bunch of stuff, and then it's like he screams. I would imagine him like shaking his fist. This is I, Hamlet the Dane, the real Hamlet, right? All right, enough acting. I'm going to come out and say, like someone was talking about before, my real feelings for Ophelia that nobody's ever known because I've had to put on this stupid performance this whole time, But now he's desperate in his grief and wants to say it. Is that our last one, guys? All right, we finished just in time. Great job. I guess we can probably debrief about Hamlet a little bit more tomorrow and talk about how we're going to write about him for unit assessments, which are coming up. I think we'll end up maybe doing that Monday and Tuesday. So keep an eye on everything going on. You've got corrections. Let's see. Now you've got a grammar lesson. It was already due today, I guess. I haven't actually checked that yet. We'll have a vocab test tomorrow, and you're finishing up watching some videos, which I actually have some mixed feelings about. I don't know about the approach this lady is talking about with the way that I don't know whether you guys noticed the way she's talking about claim and thesis and kind of a strange order and stuff. I'm gonna have to think about that and see
It's
if
sort
I
of
can.
confusing.
It is. It's very confusing.
What she's saying is just what we did last year. We used to say says does. So all she's doing is writing our interpretation or the says, and then all we're doing is does or the analysis. But she's splitting up into like 5 different parts, which I feel like are necessary.
It is. It's making it overly complicated. And the other thing that I don't understand with what they're doing with those videos, and up until this point, I think they've all been really logical and sequential and useful, is that it's all being instructed from the supposition that you have some big excerpt or a chapter in front of you that you're drawing quotes from, and that's not the case. You're writing about a whole work, and you're not expected to quote. So I don't know why she's doing it like that. Go ahead and finish up. I think there's still some valuable stuff in there about how to think about a line of reasoning and stuff, but we're not doing a full essay yet, and we are not going to have any part of Hamlet in front of us. I think what I might end up doing is doing 2 questions on Hamlet that I put in myself that I think will fit better, and keep doing it the way I've been doing it. And then when we start units 4, 5, and 6, we'll start doing more full essays, and obviously units 7, 8, and 9. But anybody have any questions before we go? I don't want to hold you any longer. Okay, thank you for being here. And yeah, I'm not sick or anything. I'll be back tomorrow. I just had to take my kid to an orthodontist appointment. So I'll see you guys tomorrow.